A jungle ridge on Guam, August 1944. A Sherman tank rolls forward, its main gun silent. From its hull, instead of a machine gun burst, comes a stream of burning, napalm-thickened fuel, 30-40 yards of it, pouring directly into a Japanese pillbox that American artillery had shelled for 2 days without result. In seconds, the position that had held up an entire company goes silent. This is what victory looked like on Guam. And to understand why the United States decided that fire, not steel, was the only way to win this island back, you have to go back to a jungle stronghold 6 months earlier, on an island most people have never heard of. January 1944, Bougainville, an island in the Solomon's Chain. American troops are stuck outside a network of Japanese log bunkers, so well hidden and so heavily reinforced that artillery and rifle fire simply weren't getting the job done. The soldiers had nicknamed it, with grim humor, the Hornet's Nest. Here's the hinge. Portable flamethrowers had already been tried. A man strapped into 60 pounds of fuel tanks, walking toward an enemy position with nothing but a hose and a prayer. It worked, sometimes. But it required troops to physically crawl within range of the enemy while carrying tanks of pressurized fuel on their backs, which left the operator dangerously exposed to enemy fire. A flamethrower operator was often the single most conspicuous target on the battlefield. Impossible to hide, impossible to mistake for anything else. And Japanese defenders learned quickly to prioritize killing that one man first. So on January 30th, 1944, someone had an idea that would define the rest of the Pacific War. Instead of asking a man to walk toward the enemy with the fuel on his back, why not put both the fuel and the man inside a tank? An M3A1 Stuart light tank, modified with a flame gun bolted where a machine gun used to sit, rolled toward the Hornet's Nest and burned it out from the inside. Of the 28 bunkers destroyed that day, half were credited to the flame-armed tanks, and by the fighting's end, an estimated 120 to 180 Japanese soldiers had died inside those bunkers, shot, suffocated, or incinerated where they stood. Think about that number for a moment. Not from a single blast, from fire and smoke methodically fed into holes in the ground until nothing inside could survive. That engagement told the US military everything it needed to know for the invasions still to come. Saipan, Tinian, and the island this video is really about. Guam. By the summer of 1944, the flame tank had evolved fast. The early Stuart-based Saipan tanks, cobbled together in Hawaii using the Canadian-built Ronson flamethrower system, carried a massive 170-gallon fuel tank for maximum burn time and needed compressed carbon dioxide just to push the fuel out the nozzle. Range was short, 40 to 60 yards with regular fuel, stretching to 60 or 80 with the thickened, napalm-style mixture, close enough that the crew inside could practically see the whites of the eyes of the men they were about to burn out. And the men who built these machines by hand knew exactly what they were making. 25 expert CBs from the Naval Construction Battalion took on the job of mounting flamethrowers onto medium tanks, and one of the very first conversions was given a name with no ambiguity in it at all. They called it Hell's Afire. By the time these machines reached Guam in July 1944, they had upgraded to the sturdier M4 Sherman chassis. Locals and troops alike would eventually give this entire category of vehicle a nickname that stuck for the rest of the war, the Zippo tank, or sometimes just the Ronson, named for a cigarette lighter company whose slogan bragged that it lights every time. That's the level of dark humor soldiers used to describe a machine that turned enemy fortifications into open graves. It wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was recognition that nothing else was working. So why Guam? Because Guam wasn't just jungle. It was jungle stacked on top of a network of caves, ridgelines and reinforced positions that Japanese engineers had spent months preparing, betting correctly that Americans would eventually have to come back and take the island by force. American tank crews arriving on Guam discovered something that should have terrified them. Their own 75mm cannons, the main weapon on every standard Sherman, were often not enough. Japanese fortifications proved more resilient to 75mm shells than expected, and this single fact, that America's best conventional tank gun sometimes wasn't powerful enough to crack a bunker, is the entire reason the flame tank stopped being an experimental gimmick and became doctrine. Marines developed a tactic with a name as blunt as its purpose: corkscrew and blowtorch. Standard gun-armed Shermans would crack a bunker open first, punching through logs and earth with high explosive shells. Then the flame tanks moved in, close, exposed, deliberate, and poured burning fuel directly into the wound the gun tanks had just made. The gun cracked the shell, the fire finished what was inside. Here's the part that doesn't make it into most textbook summaries of Pacific island hopping, because it's uncomfortable in a way that tank versus tank battles never are. This wasn't a duel between machines. It was fire, deliberately aimed at human beings who, in the jungle heat and cave darkness of Guam, frequently had nowhere left to run. One CB who operated a flame tank on Iwo Jima months later, using the same doctrine forged on Guam and Saipan just before it, described the effectiveness in a single, chilling line. In 6 hours, with 4 loads of fuel, his one tank accomplished what a full tank battalion and 3 infantry companies had failed to do across 5 days of conventional fighting. That's not a boast. That's a mathematically documented fact about how badly conventional weapons had been failing against fortified Japanese positions, and how completely fire solved the problem those weapons couldn't. But solving the problem meant a specific visceral horror for the men on the receiving end. Unlike a bullet or a shell fragment, fire didn't offer a quick death behind cover. It filled tunnels. It consumed the oxygen in enclosed spaces. It found the men who thought they were safe simply because a wall of dirt and logs stood between them and the battlefield. Japanese troops in these positions had been trained, in many cases, to fight to the death rather than surrender, and flame warfare on Guam meant that death, when it came, often came by suffocation or incineration in total darkness, inside a space they had built with their own hands to be their fortress. For the American crews inside the tanks, the horror ran the other direction. Flame tanks operated at desperately short range, as little as 40 to 65 yards depending on the model, which meant every single mission put the crew almost point blank in front of the exact defenses they were trying to destroy. A flame tank on Guam wasn't a weapon fired from a safe distance. It was a machine that had to drive directly up to the mouth of the beast to do its job, fuel tanks and all, fully aware that a single well-placed anti-tank round could turn hundreds of gallons of napalm-thickened fuel into the tank's own funeral pyre. Because that vulnerability was real, and it was constant. Japanese anti-tank guns, the 47mm Type 1 in particular, could reliably punch through a Sherman's thinner side or rear armor, even if the frontal plate held, and a flame tank, forced to close to 60 yards or less just to be useful, had almost no room to maneuver away from a threat once it was spotted. Every mission was, by design, played at the range where the enemy's weakest anti-tank weapons suddenly became lethal. There's also the quieter cost that never shows up in a kill count. These tanks were built by hand, modified, welded, wired together in the field by men like the CBs who fitted well over 1,000 electrical connections into a single vehicle. Every flame tank on Guam was less a mass-produced weapon and more a custom-built machine, expensive in labor and time, that could be lost in a single unlucky ambush, the same as any standard Sherman. Not a design failure, a calculated trade, a horrifying job done by a small number of exceptionally exposed crews, because there was no other tool in the American arsenal on Guam capable of doing it at all. So if you're wondering whether it worked, the answer sits in every subsequent island campaign that followed Guam's blueprint. Saipan, Tinian, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Each time, American commanders reached for the same corkscrew and blowtorch formula first developed in the jungles of the Pacific, because nothing else reliably cracked a fortified Japanese position without spending soldiers' lives by the dozen in the attempt. The Japanese High Command understood exactly what these machines represented too. Flame tanks became, according to Marine after-action reports from the period, one weapon that caused Japanese troops to leave their caves and rock crevices and run, a psychological effect every bit as important as the physical destruction. An enemy trained never to surrender could sometimes be made to abandon a position rather than face fire. That's not a small thing in a theatre of war defined by soldiers who, more often than any other army in the conflict, chose death over retreat. Go back one more time to that ridge on Guam, to the Sherman rolling forward in near silence, its main gun quiet, its true weapon hidden until the moment it opened up. That image captures something the rest of the Pacific War rarely allowed for, a weapon that could end a fight in seconds instead of days, that could save the lives of the infantrymen behind it, and that did so by inflicting one of the most horrifying deaths available on the battlefield. Both of those things were true on Guam in 1944. The flame tank was a mercy, measured in the American lives it saved from grinding, bunker-by-bunker infantry assaults, and it was a horror measured in exactly what it did to the men trapped inside the positions it burned. War doesn't usually offer a weapon that is unambiguously one or the other. Guam's flame tanks were both, at the same time, in the same second of fire. It was never meant to be humane. It was only ever meant to work. And on Guam, in the summer of 1944, it worked better than almost anything else the United States brought to that island. If you want to see what happened when this same weapon reached its most brutal, most necessary form yet, dug into the caves and tunnels of Iwo Jima, where the Marines called them by another name entirely. That's the story of the Zippo tanks and its necks.